everyone. Thank you for joining us to celebrate innovative research in the field of international education. Today's session will feature a presentation by Dr. Miri Yemini, the 2024 recipient of the Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship Knowledge Community's Innovative Research in International Education Award. My name is Zach Frieders, and I'm the current chair of the Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship, or TLS, Knowledge Community. I'm joined today by my fellow TLS KC members, including Dr. Kate Hellman, Programs and Resources Coordinator, Dr. Blaise Scarnati, Research and Scholarship Connections Network Leader. And many thanks also to Dr. Shauna Schaubert, the Associate Director of Research and Scholarship at NAFSA, for providing administrative support for this session and being a TLS KC staff partner. I now invite my colleague, Dr. Hellman, to speak a bit about the TLS KC Award.
Thank you so much, Zach. Hello, everyone. Each year, the TLS KC celebrates and recognizes new and innovative research from any discipline that demonstrates a potential or proven impact in the field of international education. One author's publication in the form of either a book chapter or a journal article is selected each year from a competitive slate of submissions for the TLS KC Innovative Research in International Education Award. Submissions for the 2025 award will open next week on Monday, November 19th, and we are pleased to be able to provide insights and answer any questions about the award itself or the award process. In fact, the TLS KC Award is one of 6 NAFSA Knowledge Community Awards that will be accepting submissions until February 2nd, 2025. With a few exceptions, nearly everyone is welcome to apply or be nominated for this award. If you've recently published either a journal article or a chapter in an edited volume that is based on research or are familiar with someone's work that you think deserves recognition, please submit for the TLS Research Award. Full criteria for the award processes are available on the website, but basically the research should be applicable to the field of international education, impactful, innovative, and inform applied practice or contribute to international education scholarship that is considered useful to practitioners. Again, submissions for the award and all the other open NAFSA awards will be open through February 2nd, 2025. If you have any questions, there will be a dedicated Q&A period towards the end of today's event where you can ask them, or you can also email us at tlskc@nafsa.org. I welcome everyone to post in the chat to identify who they are, where they hail from, and what brought you to the session today.
Thank you, Kate. This event is designed to highlight innovative research relevant to the field of international education. Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Miri Yemini, the 2024 TLS KC Innovative Research in International Education Award recipient. Dr. Yemini is a tenured professor of education at Technion, the Israel Institute of Technology, and her research interests center on internationalization of education in schools and higher education, global citizenship education, and education in conflict-ridden societies. She is an active member of Comparative International Education Society, the Comparative Education Society in Europe, and the British Association of International and Comparative Education, and is a past president for the Israeli Comparative Education Society. She has published extensively in multiple journals, including Comparative Education Review, Discourse, Studies in the Cultural Politics of Education, Educational Administration Quarterly, Educational Management Administration and Leadership, Teaching and Teachers Education, and Journal of Studies in International Education. She is currently leading international research funded by the European Research Council to study youth activism in diverse contexts, including climate crisis and human rights. Dr. Yemini received the 2024 TLS KC Award for her journal article, Rethinking the Sacred Truths of Global Citizenship Education, a Theoretical Exploration. You can read more about her many accolades and accomplishments in her profile on the NAFSA website. Any questions you may have should be put in the Q&A to be answered here after the presentation. We're pleased to have you here, Dr. Yemini.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. Good morning, afternoon. I'm located currently in London, so it's evening. here. I'm really excited to share today my insights from my work on global citizenship education, internationalization, and research collaboration, and how these three concepts can be or should be relevant to international education. In general, we are working in the field of international education, which is basically hugely affected by global crises such as COVID pandemic, climate change, ongoing conflicts between nation states, and we are in parallel, in a sense, witnessing significant changes in higher education. And this shifts in what is valued, what should be done, how relevant higher education is for our students, graduates, and staff. All these shifts raise essential questions about the current and future relevance of higher education, and what basically we as actors in this field can do in order to be more relevant. So basically, I would start my talk to present, by presenting the definitions and perhaps the characteristics of these three concepts: global citizenship, education, international research collaborations, and internationalization. And I'll try to provide you some ideas of what practically can be done by practitioners and by those who are being active in this field. So perhaps it would be wiser to start with global citizenship education. So the relevance of global citizenship education became quite prominent in the field of international education due to several reasons. First of all, global citizenship education as a concept was included in the Sustainable Development Goals of UNESCO, of the UN. Different synonyms of this term, like global competencies, were also included in PISA assessment by OECD. These assessments have rather important role in international government decision makings, sometimes mostly in K-12 stages, but also for higher education. And once these terms, these concepts have been evaluated by these international organizations like UNESCO and OECD, national governments, institutions, and individual universities and schools began to implement these concepts and to integrate them into the curricula and extracurricular activities in their unique contexts. But the problem with global citizenship education is there are several of them. First of all, it's a question of definition. Okay, so it is obviously has been defined many times, and many people build their own huge publication records on just using the different typologies that were developed and analyzing the different typologies and analyzing the definitions that institutions use. However, usually we address global citizenship education as some kind of ongoing process where students are supposed to develop empathy towards the other and to develop various activities, being proactive in order to tackle various structural barrier and inequalities in the world. Although it has global in the term, usually in curricula, it addressed as global and local challenges, which we know that are interconnected. However, obviously, from this definition, from this very broad definition, you can already understand that it's rather vague, and it can be quite challenging to implement this through various curricula or as an institution as a whole. Other critiques that has been addressed for global citizenship education, that it often benefits the privileged and mobile individuals in international education, especially one of the key attributes of what we call international, how we practice internationalization, is the physical mobility. And there is assumption that in order to practice global citizenship education, or if you want to become global citizen, you need to be physically mobile. Therefore, for institutions or for individuals that can be less mobile due to different circumstances, they might be denied even of the right to practice global citizenship education as a concept. There are also issues of measurement, how we know we succeeded, how we know that global citizenship education was effective. And there is rather a large disconnect between the theory and the classroom practices of global citizenship education. We can see steady increase in research performed on global citizenship education, but with the major gaps in how or whether it is being implemented. There are also issues related to global north, global south divide within this concept. As I mentioned, conflicting definition, and there is also a risk of neglecting local contexts in that sense. For example, teaching classes in English, which often is related to global citizenship education, can reduce the use of local languages, for example, or can lead to limited conversations because some of the students won't be available to discuss the concepts within the class in English as being a second or third language users. And institutions are struggling with implementing this concept. So this is for teaching. The second concept that I would like to introduce today is international collaborations, and they are kind of related, and I will explain in a minute how. So international research collaborations is also a rather wide concept, and it often includes this idea of creating or disseminating research within sharing authorship or rights in between borders. Therefore, we can broadly define international collaboration is when more than one labs or one personal investigators are involved in a publication, a project, and idea development, infrastructure sharing, and all these facilities. And if I take a step back and look at how basically institutions address global citizenship education in the teaching side on one hand, and international research collaborations in a research side on the other hand, we can see that both of them are rather connected. So in order to be efficient in international research collaborations, one need to be mobile, and one need to practice basically mobility in terms of intercultural competence and being able to connect and to engage with people from different cultural and linguistic and religious backgrounds. And sometimes institutions should basically need to decide whether on one hand they would invest their resources in order to develop global citizenship education programs that might involve mobility, physical mobility, teaching in English, which is obviously not the problem for the US, but in other countries it's a real challenge. And perhaps involve rather diverse population within the classes and extracurricular activities. But on the other hand, the research collaborations might be biased in various senses when we want to promote the same thing. For example, we know from research that international collaborations are often being developed based on a wide arrays of reasons. So if global citizenship education, it would be kind of a noble goal for the sake of the humanity, to prepare students to be capable to solve conflicts and to tackle structural inequalities, international research collaboration would be a goal that aimed to benefit the institution of the researcher themselves. And we know from many studies in the field, for example, that institutions want to partner with other institutions that are better positioned than them in terms of international ranking, perhaps, or in terms of the prestige, national prestige of the universities. They would also like to connect with more senior colleagues. Often these more senior colleagues would be coming from more privileged backgrounds, and often universities would like to connect with places that are easy to reach by air or by train. Therefore, universities and institutions that are located in a geographical periphery would suffer from basically developing these research collaborations because they won't have enough access. Therefore, when institutions decide to invest their capitals, their resources in international research collaborations, they might create or they might increase structural inequalities that are already in the system. The same is with global citizenship education in a sense. So on one hand, it has a very positive goal and institutions are kind of keen to achieve it. However, it might again increase inequalities, and it might raise questions of what institutions should do, whether they should involve in kind of the outcome of global citizenship education, which would be global citizens. These graduates will be able to travel easily to find their jobs in elsewhere, and that may in turn cause problems or challenges for institutions of higher education when they would like basically to bring on more students, when they would like to increase recruitment of more diverse populations, because they won't perhaps have enough access to these resources. So basically, when the leaderships of higher education institutions decide what to do, they need to kind of look at these two fields in a very nuanced and careful way, because often leaderships of institutions are very concerned about international ranking, right? So many of the international ranking include measures of the percentage of international staff, for example, or they might include authorship with international colleagues, with international partners. So on one hand, we would like to invest quite heavily in developing these international collaborations that will bring more research, they will bring more donations, more funding, and will provide the institutions with more flexibility, position them better in terms of ranking, etc. And if the institutions will decide to invest more in global citizenship education, on one hand, they are aiming to create more diverse student body, and they might want to kind of diversify their portfolio in terms of employability of their students and their capability to be really mobile and global. But on the other hand, they might cause various disparities in access and in their eventually capability to be competitive. So it's kind of two very different goals that institutions trying to pursue, and when they are promoted in parallel, they might or probably will create kind of conflicting rationales and conflicting ways to achieve these goals. The third and the last term that I would like to kind of wrap up this discussion with is internationalization, and I assume that you as professionals in the field are working on basically promoting internationalization in your institutions. Usually from research, we see that internationalization is being promoted more through physical mobility, through investing in students. Often it's about teaching mission of the universities. It sometimes involves research, but not necessary, and it almost ignores the third mission of universities, at least from research in the last decade. However, the outcomes of global citizenship education, they are strongly tightly related to the third mission of the university, to challenge inequalities, to be active in the society, etc. So I would argue that when designing and implementing strategy for internationalization of institutions, we need to consider these connections between the three main roles of the university: the research, teaching, and the third mission, the global citizenship education, and the fact that it's mainly concerned teaching and the third mission of the university, and the investment in international research collaboration, which are obviously concerned research, and often neglect the teaching part and totally neglect the third mission part of the universities. I think I will stop here. I think that my time is running out, and I'm really excited to hear what you think about these concepts and to take on some questions. Thank you very much.
I want to expressly thank Dr. Yemini for sharing her research with us today. That was wonderful. I'd also like to start a dialogue about international education research and trends as they relate to Dr. Yemini's research, but also the field at large. I'd like to invite my colleague Blaise to, quickly discuss a few of those trends.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you too for Dr. Yemini for your really thoughtful and incisive comments, and for a particularly useful and really important article. I think your article truly helps to foreground really not just trends, but important practices that we should always foreground, that really are grounded in re-examining and questioning deeply our not only received wisdom, but perhaps less than conscious practices. And your article, I think, in particular, is really useful and quite strong at identifying and surfacing not only extant criticisms of GCE as a concept, but then your own additions to them. And so, first and foremost, research can break new ground, but definitely questioning received concepts, frameworks, and models, I think is really particularly useful. And especially, implicit, I think, in a lot of your conversations is getting at larger questions too about the inherent tension between internationalist aspirations that are embraced by GCE, its concepts and larger frames around, UN SDGs and so forth, and then kind of pretty much worldwide movements towards not internationalist frames, but more nationalist frames and concepts. And in many ways, that's one of the grounds in which your article moves increasingly, and especially in light of recent political events over the last decade or so. That's really important. And as we go through this, I'll let Kate begin to ask some questions, but I hope we can ultimately get to is GCE, global citizenship education, as a concept and framing, is it realistically, is there a way forward? I know you offer many changes and modifications, but is it, amid all of these uncertain conditions faced by international education, is it still a viable and useful framework? So in many ways, taking the implications of much of your article and moving it out increasingly forward. But I know Kate has a lot that she wants to bring forward as well. So thank you.
I do. And before we go there, Dr. Yemini, do you want to comment or answer anything that Blaise has brought up?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Blaise. That was really important. And I would like perhaps to add two things. So first one would to challenge this idea that the more is better, both considering internationalization, international research collaborations, and global citizenship education. And I think we need to start rethink this idea that we need to do more, and the more we do, the better we go, and to kind of pick and choose what is important for the specific context, and whether we should really increase or enlarge the scope, the intensity of global citizenship education, and what it will serve, what it will bring us. And the second issue that I would like to kind of keep in mind, for us to keep in mind, is this idea of the nation state as a unit of analysis. We are so used to it. Perhaps in the US it's less prominent, but in Europe and other countries, every comparison, every statement about the policy reform would be totally based on comparison between nation states. It would be, you would open up a leading newspaper in Britain or in Israel or elsewhere, and you will see that, for example, PISA results were published, and the unit of comparison will be countries, right? We will compare nation states, who does better, who did the worst. But the fact is that the population, especially young population in many countries, even in those who were traditionally homogeneous ones like South Korea or Japan, they are not homogeneous anymore. So the population within the country is often more diverse than in between countries. And then thinking about collaborations between countries or global citizenship education to speak with the other, to connect with the other, it sometimes may be that the other is sitting between us, and us are being changed, and the nation state stops to become this leading unit of analysis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yemini. Those are really insightful comments, and I see that we have a lot of questions in the chat. So I do want to move to those and see if we can get you to answer some of these fantastic questions. And what I will do is just recast the question, and we'll see if hopefully we have time to move through all of these questions. These are fantastic, but let's start at the top. Dr. Yemini, what led you to be interested in global citizenship education? How can international educators increase GCE on campus when they're in non-academic roles, when they're not a faculty? Any thoughts on that?
So these are two different and quite complicated questions, but I will try to answer briefly. So I perhaps from personal history, which always sometimes connected right for what we do in our jobs. I was born and raised in Ukraine, and later on my family lived in Israel, and I had the chance to live and work in Germany and the UK and the US for a little bit. So I was always struggling on one hand with defining myself concerning to the others, and with moving from place to place. And I naturally became interested in various pedagogies and approaches that may lead to this capability to move more easily between places and spaces. So I was really intrigued by this idea of mobility and capability to belong to different places, and I found global citizenship education as such an interesting concept to consider. So that's how I got interested in the subject. Concerning what administrative staff can do in order to promote global citizenship education, well, actually, the answer is that quite a lot. We can see from research on higher education that even for K-12, that global citizenship education is a concept that it's quite challenging to put it in a box of a certain discipline or a certain topic. So global citizenship education is geography and environment studies and social studies and education and sociology and economy and so many things, right? So usually professors would be struggling to develop and implement global citizenship education programs because it's so interdisciplinary and it's hard to locate it in a certain discipline. There is an opportunity for non-academic staff to kind of integrate these programs and to try to promote collaborations between those who teach and who basically engage with students and those who meet students on different grounds and for different reasons. And we also know from research that more efficient programs are those who involve kind of a whole school approach. Therefore, this integration is a so much needed resource, and it can only be performed by non-academic staff that is not embedded in specific disciplines. So I do think that you can initiate, lead, integrate, and create collaborations between all people in such programs in order to promote global citizenship education campus-wide.
Thank you. And I think that comment about, you know, the entire institution and looking at that is really insightful. We do have many more questions, so we're going to keep moving forward here. Can you provide an example of when global citizenship education contributed to productive internationalization? And I don't know if you want to add anything to what you said in answering the previous question.
Right. So again, internationalization is yet another widely problematized concept. So it depends on what we count as internationalization. If we look into one of the, most common definitions of Jen Knight about integrating this intercultural, international, and global dimensions into the mission, vision, delivery of outcomes of education, we can see that basically the students or the outcomes that the students achieve is our outcome as an institution, right? So if programs of global citizenship education will be visible on campus and will provide the graduates the so much needed skills to challenge inequalities, to be proactive, to be able to engage with people from various backgrounds, the international dimensions of the institutions involved will also become more prominent. For example, let's say that the students that have been through one of this global citizenship education program now need to collaborate in their masters with a professor from another country, with PhD students from another country. If they will be well equipped for this job, then they will publish articles co-authored with professors and students from other countries, and that itself would be kind of measured by measures that assess internationalization. So internationalization will increase. I think another point to say here that in education in general, I would argue that the processes are rather lengthy and long. And if we will try to achieve these goals quickly, like directly, we often will fail. So I think it's actually okay to invest in something that it's perhaps a little vague and perhaps it doesn't bring you immediate benefits to the next year assessment of internationalization. But if you invest continuously in these processes, eventually you will also be better in the factors that are measured. And if you will try only to make the ranking better, it will be, first of all, short-term effect because they will go down afterwards. And second, it is rather hard to achieve, and the process won't be so meaningful, I assume.
Yeah, I really like your comments there about both the short-term and long-term sort of game that folks are playing in that space. Along those same lines, we have a really insightful question here from Catherine Putney. How could internationalization better align with the service mission of universities? Dr. Yemini, I don't know if you have any comments or thoughts on that.
No, that's actually a good one. And first of all, the acknowledgement that this link is neglected in contemporary strategies of internationalization is the first step to reform this situation, and it is important. So this understanding of administrators and of university leaderships that actually the link between third mission and internationalization is not that common. It's not that visible. It's basically not exist in many cases. It's an important step. And then if you would like to make this link work, you need to think what would you like to achieve. There are so many ideas that one can do. Often universities are located in very diverse urban or rural communities, and for them internationalization again is to use nation state as a unit of analysis. So when you collaborate with a faculty or an institution abroad, that would count as internationalization. Or if you send your students to volunteer in another country that is going through environmental disaster or for any other reasons, that's internationalization. But often you have these same communities just nearby in your own neighborhood, in your own surrounding, and perhaps you can work with these communities. For example, I will give you an example from K-12 education, but it can be also applicable to universities. Some of I lead a course on internationalization and third missions of universities for my MA education students, who often are school heads or school leadership in their community. And one of the projects that they led 2 years ago was to reach out to the community outside of the school. Basically, this was the community coming from Ethiopia, from Africa, and they provided courses for parents from that school. The kids knew Hebrew, that the learning that the language that it was the lingua franca of the school, but their parents actually couldn't communicate with the school because they immigrated from Ethiopia. And they created classes and opportunities for extracurricular activities to study Amharic and to teach the parents Hebrew. So basically, they were doing what we call internationalization without getting out of the borders of the nation state or out of the borders of their own community, their own neighborhood in that sense. So there are many ideas. It's just we need to think more creatively about them.
Yeah, I like your comments there about, really thinking about how one can lend the linguistic diversity to the service mission in particular. I think that's really interesting. I know we are going to run out of time for questions, but we will have another forum in which to answer those. Let's try to get one more question answered during the time that we have. Dr. Yemini, where do you see connections and disconnects between K through 12 education and higher education in relation to global citizenship education? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So there are quite few differences between schools and universities, and we need to start from there. So first of all, schools at least traditionally, are perceived as actors of socialization towards the nation state, the language, the narrative, right? And higher education institutions, traditionally at least, well, in some sense, are believed to be global players and competitors, and they are often less restricted by the government regulation policies. So these are two different types of institutions. Additional very distinct feature is the physical mobility that is many times perceived as a signifier, as a marker of internationalization. And often students, K-12 students, they are less mobile. Naturally, they live with their parents, they're younger. So again, two different types of institutions. However, we see that global citizenship education is actually uniting or a joint goal of these two institutions because it's so embedded now in international discourse. We also see, at least in Europe, that definitions of higher education institutions and school change. For example, in Israel, about a quarter of high school students get an opportunity to take courses in their local universities to get credits many years, 2 years or 3 years before they finish high schools. So basically, this divide becomes more blurred, and we don't really know, especially in online programs and with all these innovative inclusion strategies, we don't really know necessarily what is school and what is university anymore. I do think that this is the exact place where innovative programs can be developed. So what administrators can do, for example, they can partner with local schools and to involve students, pupils from schools in, I don't know, UN model programs, right? In debate clubs, in partnerships that universities already have. On the other hand, schools can also invite university students. Often students' body is more international, more diverse. They can invite students to assist in classes, to teach languages, to provide different cultural programs, and to straighten the links between these two types of institutions, and through this shared goal of global citizenship education.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yemini. And I think we could continue this conversation all day. It's so robust. I know we're not going to get to all of these questions, unfortunately, so I will invite my colleague Blaise to talk about how we can keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and thank you so much for this great discussion, and you know, all of us here in TLS are very interested in continuing the conversation across our networks, and including the Research and Scholarship Connections network in particular. So we invite you to continue to dialogue and bring forth questions after the event ends today.
All right. I want to take this time to thank you, Dr. Yemini, for sharing your research and insights with all of us today. It's been a real pleasure. Before we close out the event, we want to provide time for everyone who's attending to ask us any additional questions you might have about the Innovative Research in International Education Award itself. If you do, please feel free to drop them now in the question and answer, and we'll try and get to them before the end of the session. As a reminder, submissions will be accepted through February 2nd, and if anyone has any further questions that we don't get to today, please feel free to send them directly to us at tlskc@nafsa.org. As a wrap up, I have a final question to all of our panelists, and that is, what advice would you give to someone starting out in the field or who are wanting to share their work with others, but just don't know how or where to start with that? And for those of you who are joining us, please feel free to drop your own advice and answers in the chat. I'll start off first, and maybe I'll turn it over to one of our other panelists to join in here. So from my perspective, I often tell those who are just starting to explore research to think about how Everyone in the field has potential to contribute to what we do. This could be through formal research, which is often how we talk about contributions in the TLS space, but folks can advance the field through data analysis or evidence-based decision-making or other pathways. And particularly for those who are new, they bring fresh perspectives and have really great questions that maybe we sort of overlooked. And so chances are those questions are trends or concerns that others in the field will have as well. So how do you strike up these conversations to meet others, to explore what research has already been done, and to see how you can contribute? And as Blaise said, there's excellent opportunities through NAFSA to do this, whether it's the annual conference, the TLS community dialogues that we host at the conference, the TLS networks. And so finding spaces like this to hear about the emerging research and hear how you can connect with folks in those spaces.
Thanks, Zach. And I would add to that, there's a fantastic opportunity as well as we go through this next period for the award here for innovative research in international education. If you're really thinking about how do I get started, what's an easy, tangible opportunity that won't take too much of the time. Reviewing for this award is a great opportunity to see what are some of the innovative pieces coming out in the field. The other thing that I would suggest is the Global Studies Literature Review, reading that and keeping abreast of the NAFSA trends and insights that come out from really innovative researchers like Dr. Yemini. Those are fantastic ways to get involved, along with those community dialogues at the national conference that you mentioned. Blaise, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, just building on what Zach and Kate have said, especially at the very beginning, working with your colleagues, coming together and building those collaborations as a basis for some initial presentations or the start of an article. As Zach said, oftentimes issues and problems that you may encounter in your work or collaboration with faculty and other staff are common, and that'll allow you to start to move into the literature to see where your questions and your issues are positioned against what others have been talking about. And that'll help you move forward and get your oar in the water. So don't hesitate. Start working right now.
Yeah, I really like that comment on working with your peers and bringing ideas from inside. I'm very enthusiastic about that. And I would also say approach your students. They are always young and enthusiastic and innovative. And, engage students with these strategic planning processes, with developing programs, with assessing programs, is always so much fun and brings so many ideas to the table. So I would advise to do that.
All right. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Yemini. Really appreciate all your comments and insights. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you found that this was helpful and informative for you. Don't forget to submit an application or nomination for the 2025 Innovative Research and International Education Award. Again, those are due on February 2nd, 2025. A reminder that the recording of today's session will be available soon on the NAFSA website. And I just want to thank you and have a wonderful day.